Hey, Bitcoin wealth builders, Simon Dixon here, and welcome to episode 53 of Bitcoin Hard Talk. We're going to be discussing everything about what happened this week in Bitcoin macro, geopolitics, and we're going to be connecting the dots for you so that you can prepare for a world dominated by Bitcoin, artificial intelligence, and prepare for those central bank digital currencies. They're getting closer and closer every day. This is Hard Talk about hard money. If we haven't met each other yet, my name's Simon Dixon, and I spent the last 20 years, 2 decades of my life obsessing over this topic so I can bring it to you and document the whole journey. So without further ado, the biggest topic that we're going to be discussing today is, there's actually a couple of topics, but they all come along the same line of protecting our freedom of speech. And Bitcoin is freedom of speech, freedom to transact, freedom to store one's own wealth, and freedom to protect themselves from inflation and the atrocities of the proof of weapons network, which ends up being the creator of all the wars and all the distortions that our financial system puts us through. And we're going to navigate that all together. So the main topic is going to be the arrest of Pavel Durov, the founder of Telegram. And we're also going to be going through the Boycott Binance campaign. And then we're going to mix around that everything that happened on the geopolitical side and the macro side. So let's jump straight in. So you've probably heard it 1,000 times right now, but I'm going to give you my unique angle and tie it together with everything else. But the founder of Telegram was arrested in France. A little bit of a disclosure. At Bank to the Future, we raised finance for the original Telegram funding round. And if you watched his interview with Tucker Carlson, he revealed that he has got a very lean team of 30 people. And part of that funding round, the SEC actually came after Telegram, and we were one of the investors. And that resulted in a 72% settlement. But Telegram actually kept 28% of it. We're involved in a lawsuit and a law case against that. But that does not change my perspective on protecting freedom of speech, because this is a freedom of speech case. And so, I will always stand by a side freedom of speech, no matter what else is happening. So, that 28%, because they raised about $1 billion or so, or a bit more, was exactly what ended up funding Telegram. Just like Bitcoin was the mechanism for funding WikiLeaks, you're starting to see a theme here. All these technologies are coming together in order to protect ourselves from the oppression of governments, and all we need to do is maintain our ability and freedom to transact and freedom of speech, and we can usher in a new wave together as the next generations of politicians and technology all comes together, and we'll be documenting and navigating it every week. But taking down Telegram, we can all understand why a government might want to take down Telegram. It works off encrypted messages where you can communicate with each other, and the platform operator does not control or have access to those messages. Having said that, you can decrypt some of those messages. So it's not like Signal where it's encrypted end to end. And I believe that they can't decrypt it. Please put in the comments below if my technical understanding is wrong. But they had the ability to decrypt the message. So governments may want those messages. Why would they want those messages? And why would they want to take it down? Well, the first thing is, how do you take it down? The first thing you do is you hold the founder of the company responsible for the actions that its users participate in when sending those encrypted messages to each other. And I am no doubt that just like there are many criminals that use cars, you can't blame the car for the crime that the person driving the car has committed. Just like wearing sneakers and trainers allows people to rob banks and run away and commit atrocities and all sorts of stuff, can you really blame the technology enabler, which is the trainers and the sneakers, which enables that person to be able to do it? Well, this is what our government wants. And this is a fight. And it relates to many of the other cases that we have been covering. like the Tornado Cash, the Samurai Wallet, is the technology creator that enables these encrypted messages to be sent around the internet, are they responsible for the crimes that people commit? And I say there is serious consequences if we do not protect that fundamental freedom, because freedom of speech will be over if we do not have the right to privacy, because it means that we give the governments the right to privacy. But because some criminals, and governments are committing much of the crime, but because some criminals also can use this technology, we deprive the world of that. That is exactly what happened with the Patriot Act and with many acts that follows. And America has a constitution to hold its government accountable for upholding its privacies and its amendments. But we also need to do that in Europe and other jurisdictions, in Australia, in Asia, around the world. It's the most important thing that we're able to communicate with each other. And we resist any urge to connect the founders of those technologies with crimes that they may not have committed. Now, remember, I'm not talking about a founder having impunity to commit atrocities through their application. If Pavel was engaged in any human trafficking operation or anything like that, and he was complicit and knew that it happened, then he should be held responsible for complicity in crime. And those that are committing the crime should be held responsible. But making the application owner responsible for that is a slippery slope to problems. And so if he simply created technology and therefore awful people commit crimes with that technology, then if we allow that not to be a thing that happens, then we lose it for the innocent people. And this leads to a surveillance state. And we know what is needed to usher in a wave of central bank digital currencies. It is a complete surveillance state with a digital identity in order to programmatically allow the central bank to transition our economies into communism on blockchain called CBDCs, connected to a proof of weapons network that allows everybody to be blown up with impunity, and programmatically get everybody into debt slavery and transition to a world that we do not want to live. And in 2008, Satoshi Nakamoto gave us a resistance movement against it. And that also enabled, through cryptography, the ability for people to message with each other. So he is being connected with the worst type of crimes, the most serious type of crimes. We're talking about crimes that you'd never want your name connected with, especially if you did not commit any of those crimes. Money laundering, human trafficking, all of the most serious types of crimes that were happening. Now, but we know that although the Telegram founder managed to actually get out on bail, he posted 5 million euros in bail in order to get out. There is somebody else that's not in prison right now, and that is Mark Zuckerberg. Why? Because Mark Zuckerberg put and gave the government, as Edward Snowden revealed to us, that he gave a backdoor to the government, and therefore he is able to get away with using Facebook in order to help elections, in order to censor, child pornography and various other things. And because he has no encryption, he's able to give that backdoor, and therefore he is not in prison. Now, we would all agree that we do not want a world with child pornography. Of course, we all agree on that ideal. But by creating and holding the technology creator responsible, if they were not complicit, and by complicit, I mean they deliberately enabled it, not that they created technology that allowed people to communicate in privacy, then we will end up with no encryption, and no encryption means no privacy, which means lots of surveillance, digital ID, and we're ushering the wave of central bank digital currencies with no protection in order to resist against complete control and occupation by the central banks that will lead to universal basic incomes, where we'll be lucky, and those that didn't buy Bitcoin will have nothing to resist against it. What else did Zuckerberg did? Well, we know that there was complete censorship during those lockdowns around the alternative narrative of not taking the message from the big farmers and those that were selling the things that we're meant to be injecting into ourselves, resulting in millions of deaths and people falling down because they weren't able to get access to the information around how to be healthy. And instead, they took the word that was pushed upon them through these networks that were co-opted into a government agenda. And we know that government agenda is funded by big lobbies, and those big lobbies are funded by the Proof of Weapons Network. And that is the illusion of democracy, while we're trying to pretend that that democracy needs to be exported around the world while we blow innocent people up around the world like our wars are taking us. So anyway, Pavel is currently in prison and out on bail because he protected user data. He decided that he wouldn't give the key to the governments that wanted it, and that put him under incredible pressure. And check out his, I created a blog recently on simondixon.com where I went through our support of the founder of Telegram. We reopened up our Telegram group, and we embedded some videos and things that we think you should need to know. So head over to my blog on simondixon.com and you can find that fight in support of Telegram. Now, I don't know all the details. If it turns out he was complicit, firstly, I will make sure, and we shall make sure, and we'll cover that there is a fair judgment by jury on whether those accusations are true, because we also know that governments that corrupt absolutely can connect you. And we've also seen the atrocities that are happening when they connect you to certain crimes in order to tarnish your reputation, whether you did it or not. But he is being held responsible for what people do on the application. Why would they do that? Because they want to fear you into not creating that technology. And if you don't create that technology, then they can usher in a world of central bank digital currencies that leads to universal basic income when artificial intelligence takes our jobs, and they can try and make sure that we're not able to be put together in order to share the freedom that Bitcoin gives us with our freedom to transact. And so obviously, Telegram is used by many people in the Bitcoin community. Now they're probably downloaded a lot more apps, but they use Signal as well, encrypted end-to-end. But they wanted to ensure this is a good reason, because taking down the app can stop the people that are building the peer-to-peer technology from being able to communicate with each other. What else is used on Telegram? Well, they have a feature where you can unencrypt the message and you can go into a channel of many people, and those channel of many people are able to coordinate. And what types of things are they able to coordinate? Well, they're able to coordinate things like exposing the lies of a government when they tell us that there is no genocide happening. And so what was the number one application for sharing the fact that children were being massacred and that Palestinians are being starved and that they are going through a famine right now and that they are now invading the West Bank? What was the number one application for sharing all of the horrific things that we've had to see over the years? Well, it was Telegram, and Telegram was sharing and giving Palestinians and people all around the world in the different struggles around the world to share the things that they think we should know so that we can share them across X, and we can hold our governments to account so that they don't use the media networks in order to get away with things. So Telegram was the number one app for exposing that. It also may have had confidential information or exposing information that a politician did not want to get out. Maybe Macron had something that he wanted the backdoor for. And we saw this all happens when Snowden revealed to us what we already knew with those backdoors. And encryption is the way that we protect ourselves. And end-to-end encryption is the way that the developers protect themselves. And so we need to make sure that developers are able to create that technology, because we need to be able to make our governments better, make our fiat currencies better by regulating the regulators, which is essentially what Bitcoin does. It regulates fiat currencies by providing an exit. It regulates absolute oppression by governments by giving people encrypted ways of communicating. And it regulates bad actions by allowing people to get together and peacefully resist against certain things that are being done as we transition to this very troubling time that we are in right now. So this is a global fight for free speech. X is part of it. Telegram's part of it. And whatever our differences may be, we need to use critical thinking to understand and not just accept the headline. And we need to get law enforcement to do what they're meant to be doing, getting back to law enforcement and not asking the technology provider to do it for them so that they can scare everybody in not creating any more technology, so that they can get their way with their central bank digital currencies. So essentially, they put out an arrest warrant for him, and there was an investigation that was happening. These were general offenses. I think that from what I understand, he didn't reply or he didn't provide the data. And the allegation is that he is now, because users may have been committing fraud, he is responsible for that fraud. Because users may have been involved in some coordinated drug trafficking, he is involved in coordinated drug trafficking. Because people were using the message to cyberbully, now he is a cyberbully. And because there was any type of organized crime that was happening between those users, he is responsible for that crime that was being organized by providing the technology that innocent people and criminals can use. It is like saying that anybody that uses the US dollar, which is the #1 currency used for crime, needs to lead to the end of the US dollar. This is what they tried to do with Bitcoin. When people were using Bitcoin, because anybody is able to use it, whenever someone did something illicit with it, they would say that is Bitcoin's fault and that's why we need to take it down. And if they could have taken it down, they would have. But fortunately, we built the most decentralized proof of work network, which is backed up by electricity, which is geographically and geopolitically strategically diversified around the world. And of course, they use the political term, which is when an ally is engaging in terrorism, they call it defense. But when somebody against the system reporting it is engaging in any defense, they call it terrorism. And we have seen this play out in real time. And then they will probably have anti-money laundering laws for application creators, for the internet, complete surveillance for the internet. Oh, and conveniently, that surveillance will have a backdoor to the system so that the central bank can use their digital ID in order to execute their central bank digital currency when the Ponzi scheme that they created called banking blows up, because it is a Ponzi scheme that requires more debt, inevitably predictable and guaranteed. So the allegation, what came out after, I'm not sure if this is true, but allegedly he was invited to have dinner with the president or prime minister of France, Macron, which was the same day he was arrested. And we're not sure. But interestingly, remember that investment we made in Telegram that ended up funding? Well, later he ended up launching the network anyway, even though the investors were refunded. And they created an alternative blockchain from Bitcoin, which was called the Telegram Ton network. But remember, these alternatives are not Bitcoin. They're not powered by the largest proof of work network. And so consequently, because you connect a person to a blockchain, everything becomes about that person. And the Telegram Ton network, immediately upon the news, fell approximately 13% following his arrest. And then there was further corrections that happened afterwards. And remember, there's a bit of karma in that because that was funded by the 28% that was essentially taken from the investors in the original round. But we separate our issues here. While that is an issue that I'm not happy with, I'm more than happy to fight for freedom of speech because we can separate these things. And so there is, just wanted to provide that transparently as well. Okay. So remember, the difference with Bitcoin is that if anyone, there is no founder to arrest, there is no founder to assassinate, and the network keeps working no matter what. There is no founder of gold. And so therefore, this is the difference, which is what gives Bitcoin its commodity-like features. And what happened immediately after? Well, the Telegram ton blockchain, it stops processing transactions again, and it was down for about 7 hours, proving that these things are more centralized. And hopefully that's an important lesson for everybody, that that is the difference with Bitcoin. There's nobody to arrest, nobody to take down, and it was designed to be censorship resistant and have the ability to continue and be anti-fragile, where whatever attack vector you throw at it, it comes back bigger and stronger. But what else did Telegram tell us? And we will keep covering this story. Well, it also revealed the ideologies of certain presidents around the world. So while Europe is arresting people for tweeting, trying to control the methods of communication, trying to justify a genocide, we had the so-called governments, which we're told are the ones that do all that stuff, speak out against it. Who did we have? Well, the so-called, remember the dictator, President Bukele. He came out and he promised the protection of free speech. Now, I don't trust any governments, but I have seen nothing but good things from El Salvador. But what was the quote? So President Bukele came out and said, El Salvador is not only the safest country in the Western Hemisphere, but we also guarantee that you won't be arrested, censored, or have your assets seized for exercising your right to free speech. And this is the country that also said, because we want you to have freedom to transact, we will classify Bitcoin legal tender, which means that it's treated as a currency, which means that when you spend it, you don't incur a capital gains tax, so that you can be incentivized to use the hardest form of money that exists through digital hard sound money. So we start to see what El Salvador, how they were responding with their Bitcoin strategy. What about the boogie monster, Russia? Now, I'm no fan of the Russian way of organizing, and I'm no fan of the Russian government, and everybody should resist and call out their governments for their acts. But when governments are calling out things, you either say, yeah, they're doing that for political means, which of course they do. They all engage in propaganda. But also, we need to recognize when governments are calling out the right things. So Russia came out, and because Pavel Durov is a native Russian, they started trying to protect and gain protect from the arrest. So while France was blocking the Russian embassy because Russia was trying to protect Pavel for protecting freedom of speech, and we know that he obviously ran away from Russia previously because they wanted backdoor access. So we call that out as well. But the officials, in Paris, he had to pay 5 million euros in order to get bail. And he is now stuck in France and turning or looking towards other countries like Russia, which gave exile to other political prisoners like Edward Snowden, that was somebody that decided to expose the government for the complete constitutional violations that they were exerting, not only upon Americans, but globally upon everybody through these technologies. He had to seek exile or become a political refugee within Russia. And so now everyone calls him a Russian spy because of that. But remember, there are other war criminals in the world that have already been classified as war criminals by the highest courts in the world, like Netanyahu, who is able to travel to France and hug the Macron, while he's actually meant to be arrested because he was actually convicted in the exact same way as Putin has been convicted by the same court for war crimes, which prevents him from traveling to France. So thank you very much, France, for giving us an example of how law is used in order to protect a self-interested agenda rather than protecting from impunity from governments, and it is selectively used, as we have already seen over the last years, and we should call it out as well. So the Russian embassy in France and in Paris accused France of the authorities refusing to cooperate. So they weren't cooperating. And even the Indian government came out, and what did they do? Well, it's a big telltale sign of how India thinks. They just launched an investigation into Telegram for the alleged involvement in illegal activities, and looked to get involved in saying, could we hold the founder of Telegram responsible for the gambling and the could we, extortion things that are happening? And they wanted to do the France strategy. So India decided that this is an opportunity to try and take down Telegram by prohibiting freedom of speech. And they decided, why don't we just ban Telegram anyway? So they are going through the process of exploring whether they want to ban Telegram, because the last thing they want to happen is that Indian people are able to actually speak with each other and have more encrypted message. So you start to see stuff. What else did we happen? What else happened? Well, UAE came out. So UAE, Pavel is a dual citizen, and he actually resides in UAE. And he asked the French officials for all of access to Pavel. Basically said, we want him returned home, and because he's a citizen of UAE. And they took it to another level, which was very telling. The first thing they did is the UAE froze a deal with France in order to purchase 80 fighter jets from the French military-industrial complex. And they said that they're boycotting from that deal. Now, I really appreciate this. This certainly puts on the pressure to resist against the arrest of Pavel. And they said it is absolutely outrageous that they're holding him responsible for the actions of the users. So the French government essentially lost a $17 billion deal. But I ask a question to UAE. UAE, you could have done this all along for your brothers and sisters in Palestine, rather than giving those weapons to commit the genocide. And you just proven that you're willing and able to do it when it comes to Telegram application, but you're not willing to do it when it comes to fighting against the genocide that's being inflicted upon the West, despite the fact that you are very clearly meant to be engaging in some kind of Arab League, but then it reveals all the allegiances, which I've always been reporting, because UAE is protecting the kingdom from the British and American implants to protect the kingdom and protect the monarchy. So you have to play ball. You can fight sometimes against France, but you can't fight against the genocide that's happening within Israel. So anyway, that's enough on the Telegram story. We have another very important story to cover in the Bitcoin side, and we've got to cover what's happened this week in Bitcoin, in macro and geopolitics. Make sure that if you want to be involved in getting announcements and updates, that we have re-enabled my Telegram group, and you can find access to my Simon Dixon's announcement Telegram group on simondixon.com. Head over to the blog, and you'll see a blog about the latest in our initiatives to try and support freedom of speech. And we'll make sure you're updated through Telegram as well. We're making that alive again. Now, another story that broke related to the Bitcoin side is that Binance is now under scrutiny for seizing Palestinians' crypto funds. So this broke from Ray Youssef, because people were going to Ray Youssef, a fellow Bitcoiner, and they were saying to them, my funds within Binance have been seized. Now, remember the lessons: not your keys, not your coins, self-custody. We cover that. If you need guidance on how to self-custody, later this year, we'll be launching the Bitcoin Wealth Builder program, and you'll be able to learn how to do self-custody and the exact setups that can be used to protect yourself, because you need to protect yourself not while your country is engaged in war, but before your country is engaging in war and censorship. And so let me give you the background story. So I was following this, and we covered it in Bitcoin Hard Talk over the years. In 2023, Binance was shut down in a coup, an American coup. So remember what happened to TikTok. One of the first strategies they used, there was a call that was leaked where Israel came out and said, we have a TikTok problem. People are understanding the truth of the illegal occupation, and the young people are starting to learn about this and then becoming, intergenerational pro-Palestinian. Therefore, we need to take out TikTok. So he called Trump, he called the politicians and said, please stop them, the Chinese investors, from owning that and transfer them over to pro-Zionist investors, and make sure that that happens. And we change ownership of TikTok. And if you can't do that, then let's just ban TikTok. And now constitutional rights resisted against that, but that's still an open case. So we will see. They tried to do the same with Binance, but they successfully executed it. So Binance was originally a Chinese company, and it's the largest crypto exchange. But remember, not your keys, not your coins means that whenever you buy, if you want to offboard onto fiat currency and buy some Bitcoin, then you have to do that through an exchange, but you're meant to withdraw it, not store the Bitcoin with them. Because if you store your Bitcoin with an exchange, you just have a promise to repay that Bitcoin. And if the company goes bankrupt, then you end up an unsecured creditor where they have a bunch of promises to repay you, like a bank, but they may not actually have that Bitcoin to repay you, because a government agency may come along and seize it, because they have to comply with anti-money laundering laws. And then they can be politicized. And what happens is the banks and financial institutions come along and say, well, if you don't stop working with all these countries, even though we have a list of people or organizations that you're not allowed to work with, the US has a list called OFAC. The UK has a list that is commonly used, and the United Nations has a list. Those are the three main lists, and all other countries have their lists as well. But just because somebody within that country or a group within that country is on that list, it doesn't mean you have a blanket country ban. North Korea is an example of a country where the UK list, the United Nations list, and the US list may have a blanket ban. And so all exchanges need to comply with these requirements. And if they don't, they end up in prison with multi-billion-dollar fines. And so this was the operation that was executed, because as Binance became the largest exchange in the world, they said, we need to take the founder out, CZ. Then CZ was also engaged. If you remember way back in earlier episodes, we covered the whole FTX saga. Basically, CZ was one that exposed FTX after it was a Ponzi scheme. And that was allowed to happen because, not a Ponzi, it was basically money missing. And it was a form of Ponzi with his hedge fund and his partner hedge fund. And then it was lending money out with all the Celsius Ponzi's and various other things. That took down the system, and it was CZ that exposed that, not the regulators. The regulators allow people to lose billions of dollars of money, and then they start regulating when their traditional financial institutions want to be involved in the industry, with the launch of the Bitcoin ETF as well. Well, anyway, after CZ took down FTX, and they attempted to acquire Celsius in order to distribute people's funds, there was an attack and a coup by the Department of Justice because of violations of those anti-money laundering laws. And CZ did engage in criminal activity because you're not allowed to violate those laws. That's why even at Bank to the Future, we have to follow all of those rules, despite what my political views may be, because that's how you have to play. And we change the system by exposing it. How do we change the system? By engaging in freedom of speech. Freedom of speech leads to legal updates. Legal updates leads to more freedoms. And we abide by the laws, and we have to follow those. And we have resistance against that, but that can only happen by protecting freedom of speech. So when they decided, because of those crimes that were being committed, they fined Binance $4.7 billion wiped out a chunk of their balance sheet. They said that they basically expelled the board and said, CZ, you can no longer be the board as part of the settlement. They said, you must go to prison for up to 18 months. He only ended up getting 4 months because he probably negotiated him a deal of cooperation. And I think any type of attack on CZ for this particular thing, you can attack him for, not for engaging in any types of other activities that you can prove. But for the activity of having to negotiate in a plea deal, there is no choice but for operating an exchange. And so he was jailed for 4 months. SBF went down for about 20 years, probably get 11 years on good behavior. But how did he get that 4 months? Obviously he had to engage in a deal. What was the other thing that needed to happen? And this is when you understand the coup. Well, you had to change all the management, but for 3 years, the Department of Justice got to install their own compliance team. And the compliance team then gets access to all the data. So the compliance team of Binance right now is the US government. So the US government is running the compliance of Binance because they have to oversee everything. They took out the board, they wiped out their balance sheet. And so now Binance is essentially controlled and occupied by the US government through a successful coup so that they could gain access to all of the data at the exchange level. And then immediately after that, what happened? So CZ got all of his messages on Signal and screenshots that were used. And then the case was launched. And then they know all the accounts that CZ was doing, which was completely illegal. So he has to face the crime for that. Whatever your political opinion was, he was complicit in allowing those that were on those sanction lists to have accounts on Binance and then allowing US investors to use the platform, which pulls it into the OFAC jurisdiction, which is why he had to go to America and face prison time in America. All mistakes and all justified and part of the process if you don't follow those laws. But the coup was the important part, which is taking over Binance International by installing the US team to operate all of those compliance departments. Now, what happens next? Well, the Israeli authorities, which is, call it what you like, the 51st state of America, that then actually takes back all of that money that they own at the federal level and sends it back into America to bribe politicians so that they can change the laws within America to suit the power structure of the Israeli lobby and the military-industrial complex and Big Pharma that was being exposed by allowing people to coordinate and resist against it through Telegram and allow us to speak about it on X Spaces. The Israeli forces come along and said to Binance, don't worry about all the other AML laws, freeze the accounts of Palestinians. Now, we know that because Israel took over occupied Palestine and there is a dispute over land rights based upon all the lies that we've been told, they are engaging in ethnic cleansing, genocide, starvation, and they are engaging in a famine. And now they wanted to engage in a financial weapon of mass destruction by constricting the ability for Palestinians to transact so that they could fool the world into thinking that they're not just blowing them up, but they're all falling off one by restricting their transactions, restricting their food, restricting access to air, sea, and land through illegal occupations. And so they were fighting against that. How were they fighting against that? Well, those that were not on the list, that are ordinary Palestinian citizens, they were able to appeal to people that would allow them to send some Bitcoin across the world, because there's no way of getting fiat currency in there, because it is controlled by the Palestinian Monetary Authority, which is controlled by the Israeli central bank. And therefore, you control those rails in order to speed up the starvation and the genocide through restricting financial transactions. And so immediately the Palestinian Monetary Authority came out and said they can no longer swap the notes, the cash that was being transacted. They were all being damaged by the war, and they can't swap it for a note. So people stopped trusting those notes, and you could no longer transact in the local currency. They also blew up all of the banks in Palestine. So there are no banks left, and in order to try and get access to some of those financial institutions. So the IDF blows up those banks. And then they went across to the crypto exchanges and said to Binance, you are violating AML laws, freeze all accounts. And they say, well, in order for us to keep our bank account, how are we going to be able to know who is an innocent Palestinian that needs food versus money that may go to an organization that may be on a list, and therefore you become complicit in that? And so we know how this is weaponized. It is weaponized in order to freeze and steal the assets. And all over social media, people started reporting, I can't access my money anymore, so I guess I can't buy food. How convenient. And so a campaign was launched called Boycott Binance. And I went on a space yesterday. We'll upload the space for those that want to understand more about it, where I went into intricate detail about how this actually makes Binance complicit because it is occupied by the US government using Israel's demands in order to speed up the genocide and starvation and mass famine. And so that is why people started to withdraw their funds from Binance en masse. On the day we looked at, and again, I'm a shareholder in companies like Kraken and Coinbase and Bitfinex, but those exchanges, they didn't have a massive net outflow on that day. About 44,000 Bitcoin worth approximately $3 billion was withdrawn from Binance, about $2 billion as stable coins, and the price of the BNB token corrected by a market cap of a few more $billion. So if you want to continue using the exchange of the US government, at least you know now. And if you don't learn self-custody, then you need to leave them there. And so make sure you are protecting yourself, because you do not know when your country is going to become an enemy of the system, and therefore your assets get frozen at those crypto banks. So I'll make sure I upload the space to YouTube as well. But what else happened at the same time? People that were exposing this started to get arrested in countries like the UK. And so we had one of our pro-Palestinian voices, Sarah Wilkinson. She was supporting people that needed to get access to essential healthcare because the governments were failing. And suddenly she gets arrested. Her children are all asked to open their phones. 12 police and agents show up at her door. And all she was doing was preventing starvation. She got released on bail because it seems like there were not a very good case for this stuff. Again, people should be held responsible, but understand when this stuff is being weaponized against us, which is why we need to be able to communicate through Telegram, and we need to be able to reveal our freedom of speech. And it's why YouTube gives me no traffic. And all of the traffic, even though my followings is going up and I'm getting more and more views on X, suddenly YouTube doesn't give us any more views other than what we email out to our followers. So you've got to be on my mailing list if you want to get the updates. Go to simondixon.com, become a free member of the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. And we will also be releasing the Bitcoin Wealth Builder program to help people understand how to protect themselves with self-custody and escape from the proof of weapons network as well. Okay, so that is the Binance story. What else did we get to see? Well, we started to see the intersection between geopolitics and cryptocurrency as well. Russia made an announcement that they are going to start using crypto for international payments and transactions from next week, September the 1st. And so we're going to start to see what that means, what blockchain are they using. And of course, I'll make sure I cover that if it's a fugazi, or if it genuinely improves your freedoms, or whether all it does is create a resistance against the impunity of the US dollar proof of weapons network. But we also, remember, we're getting more and more transactions that are being, while they're doing coups on the crypto exchanges, they're also supporting traditional finance in order to persuade you not to own Bitcoin, but to just speculate on the market instead. Use leverage and support the fiat currency proof of weapons network by levering up your Bitcoin, exchanging it for fake Bitcoin with a traditional financial player, and then using leverage in order to lose all your Bitcoin so that they can clip fees and persuade you to trade and make you into a degenerate gambler by using leverage instead of real Bitcoin. And so there was an approval by the SEC to start trading Bitcoin options on the NASDAQ exchange. So, of course, they want you to swap your Bitcoin into TradFi and start levering up so that they can support the proof of weapons debt network using options and various other things. What else did the SEC do? Well, it also announced a Wells notice to the NFT platform OpenSea. And so now we'll start to see, are NFTs collectibles or are they securities? According to the SEC, they think that it should be treated as securities. People will resist back against it, saying that they're more like Pokemon cards. And we shall see what happens. And whether you get Harris in America or whether you get Trump, they will decide what direction crypto regulations goes. And you need to think very carefully about that, because the SEC continues to sue under the existing administration, while the Republican administration said it will go through an environment of deregulation and support of the industry and build up its Bitcoin strategic reserve asset. We still, remember, get no evidence from Harris and Biden that they want to support our industry, because they are building a system that does exactly what it did, where you get scam artists getting to scam people and then take those out, don't care about the ones that are losing their money from those scams, and then hand it over to the traditional finance industry. We will keep covering this story as this is more and more initiatives to hand over to TradFi. Now, rather than doing a strategic reserve asset, Trump comes out and decides that what the world needs is Trump trading cards built on top of Bitcoin ordinals. So, you know, I like the utility that builds the competitive market for transaction fees through ordinals. Do it on Bitcoin rather than other networks. Good. Creating NFTs, does that really change the game? Well, maybe it supports your campaign financing, and maybe that adds more transparency. Interesting. But the most important thing to save America from the Federal Reserve is the Bitcoin strategic reserve asset. And Cynthia Lunis already introduced that bill. And RFK, who joined the Republican Party and got that role, already laid out the strategy for how to free yourself from the Federal Reserve and the proof of weapons network. This is not exactly what you wanted, Trump. It may sound interesting to make some money, add some more transparency, but this is not the game changer that will make America great again by freeing itself from the Federal Reserve and the lobby. Strategic reserve asset on the government's balance sheet, not the Federal Reserve balance sheet, is how you free yourself over time from the Fed. Okay, right. What else did we have? Let's move into the macro section. So remember, the market, the rules of the market. No one cares about free markets. No one cares about an invisible hand. Everyone says, Federal Reserve, please lower rates so that you can pump the price of our stocks so that we can keep the debt-based Ponzi scheme going for a little bit longer, publish some fake numbers, manipulate them through illegal immigration, and then make everyone feel like we need to go to war in order to support the industry and drive everyone against each other. That's the existing policy of the Federal Reserve. And both the left and Republican and Democrats and Labor and Conservative is all looking to the Federal Reserve to save the stock market and create more wealth inequality. So on the macro side, how is that being enabled right now? Well, all of the stocks have got completely out of whack because now everyone is buying ETFs, which is funds that say, you know, put money in every month, which is a good approach, dollar cost averaging. That's how we do it in the Bitcoin industry. But every time you buy an ETF, we have to buy all those stocks. So now more money goes into ETFs, and more people are buying those stocks through the ETFs. You hand over your voting rights to the ETF providers like BlackRock. They get to control the direction of boards, introduce narratives like ESG, and you lose control of having your voting right for those stocks. And that's how a big portion of control through ETFs. And this drives out of whack where you have stocks that only go up on one thing from money printing by the Federal Reserve, reduction of interest rates in order to pump that. So now everybody is looking at the most important stock in the US from an artificial intelligence perspective, which is NVIDIA. NVIDIA is providing the problem of how does all this artificial intelligence get access to all the data centers to crunch through all of this data in order to provide all this efficiency and change in world that artificial intelligence is going to be provided for us. So they're providing that, and everybody's looking at their earnings, because if NVIDIA doesn't perform, that leads to a sell-off in the market, that leads to a reduction in some of the ETFs, and that leads us begging the Fed to reduce rates so that we can pump the scheme again and keep rolling over the Ponzi. So NVIDIA earnings better be good, because really 80% of all the attention in the stock market is around those public earnings from NVIDIA. And thankfully, thanks to everybody, now that the market is dependent upon that, what is the geopolitical play that we need to understand with NVIDIA? Well, NVIDIA still relies on having access to the best chips in the world. Where are those chips made and those semiconductors made? They are made and manufactured in Taiwan. What does Taiwan need in order to manufacture them? Well, it needs the commodities that are produced 90% in China. So China's producing the commodity, Taiwan is producing the chips, and then those chips are weaponized in a trade war of whether they go back to China or whether they go to America, and the whole world needs them because the top companies like NVIDIA are becoming bigger and bigger and bigger in order to provide all the data that's needed to prop up the market, and that requires the Federal Reserve to pump more debt-based money so they can leverage money, they can borrow at 0%, buy back their stocks, and take those that don't have those assets deeper and deeper into debt where they can't afford their property. And so that is why America and China should not be engaging in geopolitical or macro trade wars, which both Trump and the Biden administration are pushing right now, which can take the whole thing off kilt and cause massive economic destruction while both China and America are trying to become independent of Taiwan as well. Okay, so thankfully those numbers were good and we can keep up the normality of the Ponzi scheme. And so NVIDIA, they beat all of the headline expectations. They reported a record revenue of $30 billion, which was up 122% year on year. They announced a $50 billion stock buyback plan. They'll probably call up their buddies at the Federal Reserve and say, let's put some more of those assets, those junk bonds on your balance sheet so that we can get ready. We can buy back that stock at cheap, and then we can pump the price as well, and everybody can be happy. We also got an announcement from Berkshire Hathaway. It became the first company in the world, which is Warren Buffett's company, to hit a $1 trillion market cap as a non-technology company. So you've obviously got NVIDIA, Microsoft, Tesla, and Apple, which are the technology plays that need the data and the AI that NVIDIA is providing, which requires Taiwan, which requires China's commodities, so that we can get the central bank, as we've already covered. But they're the first non-technology company now to achieve it, because Berkshire Hathaway knows when to buy and knows when to sell because they have access to all the information. And they are selling right now. What is it that Berkshire Hathaway knows that made them $1 trillion company by selling stocks when everyone else is buying them through ETFs? We shall see. This is why everybody needs to protect themselves. And these are the types of principles that we always cover on the Bitcoin Wealth Builder program. Every 4 years, I reveal exactly how I protect myself. I share it for free, published. You can get access to that by signing up on simondixon.com. What else did we see in the macro side? Well, the relationship with India has become really important now, because India has now overtaken China to become the number one buyer of Russian oil. The reason that they're buying it on cheap from Russia is because the US sanctioned, and now India is buying it from cheap from Russia, exporting it to Europe, and they're becoming one of the fastest growing economy using Russian oil and American sanctions. The desired effect never really happens. And then the US is using their relationship in order to execute coups in regions like Bangladesh, and that we covered in previous episodes, and Pakistan that we covered in previous episodes, by taking that money that sits outside the existing system, and so they can execute non-congressional operations executed by the intelligence agencies like Mossad and CIA that sit on top of government but below the central bank. Another thing that to look out for, this is another evolving story, which is, remember there was a leak around on WikiLeaks around the 7 countries that needed to be toppled by the deep state and the CIA. And one of those was Libya. And Libya has been almost a failed state ever since. But there is now a big dispute between the Libyan central bank, and US has decided to intervene because they are using the different military forces in these coups and destabilized regions in order to gain control of the oil reserves. And so you detopple those industries so that the countries cannot cooperate together, combine their oil in order to create resource-backed currencies, which is what Gaddafi wanted to do, which is why he got taken out by the deep state, and why now US is intervening in figuring out who's going to control the Libyan central bank. And so there are currently rival administrations that are getting their weapons from the Proof of Weapons network, and they're now arguing over who's going to control the management of the Libyan central bank, so that whoever a US decides, based upon this operation, they can cut off the oil, which is the funding, and that income that is derived from it, and then they can implant the politician that America wanted to do, not in order to strengthen that currency and spread democracy, but to ensure that the different countries in the Middle East can't cooperate in order to create an alternative currency backed by real resources, and US can destabilize those regions. So, Libya is struggling to recover from years of that. This was executed in 2011, and it was NATO-backed during the Arab Spring uprising. This is when, Gaddafi needed to go and needed to be executed because he wanted to create that currency backed by oil and reunify the African nations as well. Okay, so we're seeing, we're seeing a return to that as well. And at the same time, we are getting a legitimate, resistance as well, with a return to Gaddafi's policy, where BRICS are unifying together because of the sanctions and because of the upheavals that have been happening in regimes like Venezuela, because America wants to get hold of that or make sure no one can unify around that. And so BRICS has come along. There's the conference that is happening in October, the BRICS summit. But who else? They said they're going to launch a cryptocurrency, and that cryptocurrency is going to have two stable coins, a cryptocurrency exchange, which is going to be a national cryptocurrency exchange. We know that means you give the data to the country that's operating that. But it's going to have the two stable coins on it. One is the Chinese yuan, and the other is going to be the BRICS cryptocurrency, which is meant to be backed by gold. I'll tell you as soon as we get more details what blockchain it uses, whether it's a Fugazi, whether it's good, whether it's bad. We'll cover that on future episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk. If you want to get notified by YouTube, because YouTube will not show this content to anybody, please make sure you're a subscriber of the channel. Even if you're watching this on X, head over to YouTube right now, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell symbol, hit all. And if we're lucky enough, YouTube will send you an email every time I go live, and I'll make sure you get those additional videos like the Binance boycott and various other things emailed to you from being a subscriber. But geopolitically, in other videos, we've always said that Saudi Arabia is a very important side. So on the macro side, interestingly, China has now become Saudi Arabia's largest oil customer, which is accounting for more than 20% of the kingdom's oil exports. This kind of plays into the narrative that I've been speculating upon, that the petrodollar is going to be in decline, which is what's creating more of the demand for dollars with Saudi Arabia. And they're going to play both sides and make sure that more business is done with the BRICS cryptocurrency for oil trades. And now China is 20% of those oil exports. And I see that you can see they'll use this as a proxy, the BRICS market cap versus the dollar market cap and the resources that are backing it, in order to determine what ratio of oil is going to be priced in dollars and priced in BRICS currency. We'll keep covering it as well. But that is all done. Those payments are all done in the Chinese yuan. And it has now surpassed how many transactions that are done in the Chinese yuan has now actually surpassed the US dollar by 2.5%. So more transactions are now done in the Chinese yuan than the US dollar. Now, that doesn't mean that, that the Chinese yuan is becoming the world reserve currency, because the US dollar is still the world reserve currency, and more people are willing to engage in their savings in dollars. But because of the Russian sanctions, less and less governments are willing to do that, which is creating these alternatives. And now the Chinese yuan does more payments than the US dollar. They have larger population as well, so you have to look at that on per capita, but these are changing trends. Now, who else has decided to join BRICS? Well, it was officially announced that Palestine will be applying to join BRICS, and China's peace plan involves making sure that there is normalization between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and that can lead to a retreat of the US bases that destabilize the region. And that can change to a multipolar world, so that America doesn't need to engage in these forever wars where they are being asked continually to fund the expansion of NATO, which has led to a return to the Cold War with Russia through that NATO expansion, the death of Ukrainian lives, the death of Russian lives, and the atrocities that are happening across the Middle East that will be diving a little bit deeper in the geopolitical section as well. Now, always remember as well, when a country wants to free themselves from their central bank, we have already got the beta test. So at the same time as Palestine, officially applying to join BRICS, we also had the Palestinian president in El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, that has implemented the legal tender strategy to encourage people to come to El Salvador in order to build free speech technology, to build the strategic reserve asset of buying one Bitcoin every day to free itself from the US dollar and the policy of the Federal Reserve, and make a peaceful transition away from the central bank, because he read the book of a Palestinian economist called Saifedean Ammous in the Bitcoin Standard, that is being modeled and used by the strategy that's being put together in El Salvador. So when Palestine is free and they want to free themselves from the International Monetary Fund, the Israeli Central Bank, the Palestinian Monetary Authority that may be implanting its own government to work against the interest, then they can always put together a Bitcoin strategic reserve asset strategy that we've already been beta testing with El Salvador, and anyone in the world can do it as well. And if you didn't watch today, by the way, I did a Bitcoin Hard Talk interview around the concept of God's money, And you might want to check out the interview. You might find it interesting what wisdom we can get from our ancient scriptures in terms of free markets, hard money, and the ethics we need to implement in order to move to a more sustainable future based upon free markets and hard money. Love for you to check out that interview when you get some time. Right. So that's everything on the macro side, but the macro and the Bitcoin is really tying into the geopolitical side. So let's run through, take a quick journey around the world. While I'm doing that, I'm going to head over to what's happening geopolitically in America, in the Middle East, in Russia, Ukraine, China, North Korea. We'll run around the map and make sure that you've got the full uncensored story. But do me a favor, if you're enjoying this, retweet it. I want as many people to see it. Not naturally anyone's going to find this. I rely upon you to share the information so more people are protected. So I'm going to take a quick water, and after 3, do me a favor. Either comment, either subscribe, either repost, either retweet, either hit the like button, but do me a favor and just do something that means more people are going to be likely to see this message. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you very much. We are now recharged the voice to go through the geopolitical section. Right. So the speculation last week was that RFK is going to join forces with Trump, and we're going to hold him to account to the things that we cover on Bitcoin Hard Talk around to how to free America from the deep state, which is revealing the truth about who was engaged in some of the classified documents, and also to free itself from the Federal Reserve without destroying and taking the whole world down with it, which is the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve Asset Strategy that was outlined by RFK in Bitcoin 2024 in consultation with the industry and the beta test with El Salvador. Okay, so RFK has now officially dropped out of the US presidential race and is now endorsing Trump and will have a role in the Republican administration. Trump announced that he will create a commission, and that commission will investigate the assassinations led by RFK of both JFK and Trump's assassination attempt, and he will be able to lead the reveal of that. Now, there already is many documents with redacted names, and you know that when America finds out who was responsible for that and the policy of what JFK was trying to do at the time, because he was trying to remove the illegal nukes that Israel was hiding from America when it stole that technology illegally and didn't open it up to inspection. And also when it was going to classify AIPAC as a foreign agent, which means that it couldn't buy American politicians like it does today in order to do Israel first policy. And when JFK was going to end and transition away from the Fed by returning to a silver-backed or gold-backed version of the dollar, JFK disappeared. And the documents, Trump knows exactly who was involved with it. RFK knows exactly who was involved with it. But because of the powers of the deep state, they're not allowed to do it. So what I want you to do as Americans is hold JFK and Trump responsible if they are elected to release those files, and an attempt to release them, because Trump said he would do it last time, may not mean that may be the very reason why Harris becomes the next president, because she's not committing to releasing that, because that changes the power structure. And as Americans, make sure you read all these files. I would like you to add the unredacted 9/11 files and the unredacted Epstein files, and I think you will figure out a lot of stuff that will make Americans understand why they need to free themselves from the deep state and what the real truth is, and how to make sure they're not involved in forever wars by understanding those and unredacting those files. Okay, so that's what I ask you for. Personally, I know that they are controlled by forces, and we'll cover that in the Middle Eastern section right now, that won't allow them to release it, but they're saying they will. So I'd like you to hold them account. And because they said they will do a Bitcoin strategic reserve asset that will allow a peaceful transition and an the Fed transition over time, then please I would, if I were American for that reason, have to vote Trump and RFK because they understand these issues. I got zero faith they'll do it, but it's better than 0.0 faith, I guess, as well. But I want you as Americans to hold them to account whatever happens. So Bitcoin strategic reserve asset to protect American government from the Fed, and a release of those files so that Americans can understand the truth about the deep state. And once they understand the truth, they won't be so gullible to engage in forever wars. And then you can reverse the impact of inflation and hopefully engage in a peaceful transition as we transition to a world dominated by Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies. There was massive escalation on the NATO expansion through Ukraine and the Russia invasion because Ukraine violated all of the agreements, and now NATO has returned Ukraine and Russia to the Cold War. There's been massive escalation. So Russia came out and they said there will be severe punishment awaits for those behind the attack on Russia. So Ukraine is now inside Russia with UK weapons, with European weapons, with American weapons, and an agreement that they won't launch long-range missiles into Russia. Russia then decided that it would launch missiles and drones against Ukrainian cities and energy infrastructure, and so that leads to more, issues as infrastructure gets taken out, so that Ukraine can be fully occupied by the Federal Reserve and BlackRock's investments when they rebuild Ukraine and make sure that it's fully owned and occupied by the deep state. Zelensky asked for the West. So Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, he asked for the West to lift the restriction on the use of long-range strike so that they can strike and they can basically launch missiles right into Russia, which would be a massive escalation. But guess who's happy with that? The shareholders of the military-industrial complex, which lobby politicians to implement the policies of NATO. And NATO says, Americans, Brits, Europeans, please allow it so that we can launch long-range missiles from Ukraine into Russia, and we can escalate this and everyone can spend a shitload more money on protecting themselves and transitioning to the war plan rather than the peace plan that China wants to implement, which involves reversing all of those trends. Russia came out and says that BRICS must be, and again, decide whether this is propaganda or not, toot in his own book, but of course he needs to say this. Russia says that BRICS must be prepared for the collapse of the US dollar, so that if it does collapse, there is a way of transitioning to other world reserve currencies. And I add to that, be prepared for that. And that is a Bitcoin strategy as well. And countries should be prepared, companies should be prepared, and individuals should be prepared. China then came out and accused NATO of proliferating, Ukrainians' war with Russia. It blames NATO for it and the aggression, even though the NATO expansion, Russia has its story, the removal from all of those agreements. We don't need to go over that again. And Chinese President Xi Jinping says that he would, that the world is big enough for all countries to be able to develop and progress and trade with each other together. We don't need to go into these forever wars, and we don't need to put to more aggression because we'll all lose. And with that in mind, we've got the other sides of the party equation that are now deciding what they're doing. So now Russia is strategically aligned with Iran. Russia said, however much NATO militarizes Ukraine, Russia will militarize Iran. And now North Korea has started to receive its first shipment of drones that came and are manufactured in Iran because it's building its own chip manufacturing industry. And that then is connected, all of these drones and this AI warfare then connects to Taiwan. And so if China decides to reunify with Taiwan, it can have a massive impact on all of the different things, which is why we have no choice but fight against the deep state and fight against the occupation by central banks that are taking us in this direction. Right. So let's go to the Middle Eastern side now that we know that that's happening there. And that will be the final part. And that's going to do it for Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 53, I think we're on. Right. So you all would have seen the headlines. If you didn't see the headlines, let me tell you what the narrative is from the Western media that you're meant to believe. And then let me tell you what happened from people that are actually on the ground reporting as well. So Israel came out, and the headline was that Israel launches a preemptive strike, which means that it knew that Hezbollah in Lebanon was going to launch a strike. They said it was involving 100 missiles originally, and then they launched 100 fighter jets. So they found it as Hezbollah was preparing to launch rockets into Israel. They also said that it was going right into Tel Aviv. And across the different X spaces, they were saying if it's going into Tel Aviv, then it must be civilian targets, when Hezbollah does not do what Israel does, where it kills civilians in order to escalate the war and negotiate and push forward negotiations and get leverage as well. So that was the story. And the story was then painted that Hezbollah failed to launch over 300 missiles and drones into Israel because they preempted the strike. Despite the fact that their retaliation happened 1 hour and a half after the original precision strikes to military targets. But they want you to believe that the state actor is the good people and the non-state actor is the bad people, because obviously Israel wants you to all go to war with Iran in order to make sure that Israel remains the sole nuclear power for the expansive Greater Israel project that involves encompassing Syria, Lebanon, parts of Egypt, annexing West Bank, ethnically cleansing and genociding the Gaza Strip, and taking control of those regions. Okay, so here's what actually happened. The IDF then claimed that the Iron Dome worked. They missed their targets because they were targeting civilians, and everything got interrupted. They want you to believe that. They claim that Tel Aviv can only be civilians. Basically, what came out afterwards is Hezbollah, through its public statement, they refuted the claims, and they said that its leader, Nasrallah, which is really interesting because Israel always says Nasrallah always tells the truth, but at the same time, they say he's lying. And so whenever he says something, they say he's got a track record of you always believe what he says because he says he does what he says. But at the same time, they're saying he's lying, and he will come out and give a speech. So he came out and gave a speech. And what is really fascinating is that now US and Israel, for the first time, are actually negotiating with non-state actors. And they're negotiating with them because America wants not, the people that are negotiating doesn't want to go to war because they know it will be disastrous because of the whole reasons that I gave. Israel wants to go to war, and the deep state obviously is pushing their self-interest to try and get America into war. And so while they're, one side is saying we're negotiating, the other side is just organizing everything and funding the whole thing and pushing everything through. And so what actually happened from all the evidence that was reported on the ground is that Hezbollah launched 320 very basic rockets, which are old rockets, not their new advanced ones from the Soviet Union time, and some additional drones. They were launched at military targets. And the question was, is America and Israel going to de-escalate and take this as this is sufficient retaliation to the fact that in order to stop peace negotiations, because Israel doesn't want to release hostages, they came into Lebanon and assassinated leaders in Beirut, which was a violation of its sovereignty, forcing Hezbollah to retaliate. And then when they retaliate, they're asking, is America going to see this as a retaliation that doesn't need to exit, that needs another retaliation? And so that is the negotiation that is happening. And in order to execute that, they didn't go after civilians. they targeted intelligence headquarters, which are responsible for recruiting agents of Mossad. And so that was the target. They managed to breach the Iron Dome, so they managed to hit their target, and the drones actually got through, which demonstrates that they can get through, which sends a signal to US. And then Israel and US need to create this fake story that there was a preemptive attack from them trying to come after, those targets. Right. So when they tried to reveal the fake story, they originally came out and said, yeah, it was 300 missiles. Then they said it's actually 1,000 missiles that we took out. And then someone else from Israel said, no, it's 6,000 missiles that got taken out. And then I think it was Netanyahu that finally said, no, it's 8,000 missiles that got taken out. And now Hezbollah is demilitarized. Even though there was all of the footage shows that there was no secondary explosion. If you take out 8,000 missiles, there would be a massive secondary explosion, and there would be massive evidence that no one else could see. According to Israel, and even though their retaliation happened an hour and a half after the initial missiles and rockets and drones were fired at the military target. Remember, Israel has already publicly said that Hezbollah has 250K missiles. So we know that this wasn't in line with anything that they said, because even if they did get those 8,000 missiles out, they've got 250,000 according to Israel's public intelligence that they share. The reality is that Netanyahu doesn't want to save the hostages. And remember, everyone's getting ready to throw Netanyahu under the bus, but the alternatives, Smotrich, and Benny Gantz and various others, are more extreme because they're the one in charge of the military and doing the expansion of illegal settlements, which is annexing West Bank and making sure that they're expanding the war rather than negotiating a deal with the hostages. Everybody's getting ready to make Netanyahu public enemy number one. He's trying to save his career. America wants to end it, but the deep state controls the American Congress in order to make sure that the military industrial complex benefits to push those stock prices up from the money at the Federal Reserve that sits on top of the whole thing. But if they demilitarize right now, which is because they recognize that this may be disaster, that's the chess game that is being played out right now. And it looks like they won. The message worked. There hasn't been a retaliation. And if there isn't a retaliation, this brings all the attention back from Hezbollah in Lebanon and back to Gaza. And so while they're doing the negotiations, what do they do in order to get leverage and make sure it doesn't end in peace? They need to kill more civilians, and they need to weaponize the starvation and famine. And so they come after all the financial institutions, and the Palestinian Monetary Authority executes the financial weapons of mass destruction on behalf of the Israeli central bank. And you get all of those cases and the Binance boycott and everything that followed from that, so that they can't access any money in any way while they restrict all of their supplies, so that they can just get rid of them, so that they can take back they can execute the next phase of the Greater Israel Project. And that's how I see it. And I'd love your thoughts in the comments section. And if you see anything differently, so that we can make sure that we're sharing information with each other and ahead of this, so that we don't get scammed. So what did they do in retaliation? The most escalatory thing you could do, which reveals the whole damn thing, that everything we've been saying all along is that this is a land grab, and this is about property rights, and this is about a genocide and ethnic cleansing that's being executed in order to get rid of the Palestinians. Because what did they do? Israel decided to invade the West Bank. Yes, that's the West Bank that is controlled by the US implant Palestinian Authority that has nothing and is not controlled by the war that they're allegedly against, where they're saying it's an Israel-Hamas war. And this is the very same West Bank where they've expanded the illegal expelling and they've militarized militia groups in order to allow Israeli settlers to act with impunity to kill Palestinians in the West Bank. And they've been taking those prisoners without fair trial, putting them in they're calling them terrorists because they defend themselves and defend their property, putting them in prison. And we started to see all of the things that they accused were happening on October the 7th, where there was video footage of those IDF soldiers taking Palestinian men and doing atrocities on camera that they accused that was happening on October the 7th, Palestinian Authority, while they authorized the expansion of illegal settlements, revealing the whole con of the whole thing, that this was all about weaponizing atrocity propaganda, lying about it in order to fulfill the greater Israel project. Remember Netanyahu right now, this, by the way, this is already classified in the highest court that this is an illegal occupation. That happened earlier this year after a multi-year court. And Netanyahu is sanctioned as a result of that on the United Nations, where he is classified a terrorist in the same category as Putin and the leaders of Hamas as well. So they are meant to arrest him, not welcome him into Congress. And this is based upon Geneva Convention exposing the whole thing. This is a complete escalation, and it reveals the whole lies of the whole thing because it is expanding illegal settlements, is expanding the invasion. And remember that Trump, we're going to hold him to account. We want him to release those files so that he can reveal who was behind the assassinations and all of those things, so Americans can understand it, because he's already taken 100 million in order to annex the West Bank in exchange for the 100 million of campaign financing. So this is playing in line with the exact strategy, holding off till a Trump administration so that the greater Israel project can be fulfilled using the financial bribes that are put through AIPAC and other groups that America needs to free itself from, and needs to put the Bitcoin strategic reserve so that the Federal Reserve can't print the money and create the inflation that puts Americans in debt slavery and funds the proof of weapon network. So US, NATO, and Israel are still waiting for the retaliation from Iran. That should be seen as completely separate, because remember, in order to escalate this, Israel also did a military strike and took out the sovereignty of Iran. And so we're still waiting for some kind of retaliation as a result of that, which can trigger off the whole thing, which is why Israel successfully got all of those American troops, where 1/3 of American naval force and troops are in the Middle East right now, getting ready to fight for Netanyahu and the greater Israel project. Okay, now in terms of how that impacts the macro side, this is the final part. We'll do the Middle East side. Remember that we already have seen that Iran, through its allies, if it chooses, it can cripple half the world's economy by cutting off the Red Sea, the Suez Canal by Egypt, the Mediterranean Sea near Syria, and the Arab Sea near the Indian Ocean, which can create absolute economic chaos. And to show that, the Houthis in Yemen and Ansarallah, the forces, they successfully blew up an oil tanker in the Red Sea to demonstrate the economic chaos that can be inflicted if this escalates, which is why the BRICS currency is happening. The multipolar transition is happening because of these geopolitical strategic relationships. If that is allowed to happen, if this escalates, we could end up with an oil price of around $200, which will create absolute inflationary pressure. It will blow up the banking system like we saw from Silicon Valley Bank during the time when Russia came in to Ukraine. and break the whole financial system. And this is exactly what could lead China to reunify in order to make sure that they get back control of those chips when America is exercising trade wars in order to stop that, so that they can prop up Nvidia, so that they can prop up their whole market based upon the promise that the Federal Reserve will reduce rates in September and roll over the Ponzi scheme while we figure out how much more they can borrow from the Bank of Japan at 0% interest, creating an inflationary spiral in Japan. And they cannot handle that happening with oil prices. So we do have to free Palestine in the end, and we do have to end the genocide, and we all have work to do it in a peaceful transition, and everybody should resist and boycott those exchanges which are boycotting and holding innocent civilians' money as a result of Israel requesting those financial weapons of mass destruction to be inflicted, because everybody will suffer. No one is immune from this unless you've bought your Bitcoin protection and you've already got yourself to a level of financial sovereignty, which is why I want to make sure everyone gets there and they build a plan to do that. Hence, make sure you're on the mailing list, and I'll be releasing a video series to help people, which I do every 4 years after Bitcoin halving, on how to protect yourself from the whole damn thing. Just remember, US can end this overnight, so don't believe a word that they're saying to you, because the way they can end this overnight is by defunding Israel, stop sending the weapons across, and then they'd have to engage in China's diplomacy. But America doesn't want China to look like somebody that wants peace. They want to look like somebody that wants peace while supporting NATO in the expansion into the Middle East and supporting their expansion through Japan and Taiwan and Philippines into East Asia as well, into the Far East. Yeah, I just want you to know that it's pretty unprecedented that the most powerful military in the world, US, one of the most powerful institutions in the world that has massive control over the US, Israel, are now having to negotiate with a non-state actor because of the geopolitics that's happened that have been explained throughout this whole thing. And the whole thing is held on making sure that you don't have too much inflation, which is part of defunding the central banks through a peaceful resistance. So remember, Israel will continue to get worse and kill more and more civilians and babies, so that puts pressure on the negotiations so that they can submit. And that's what people are asking for at the moment. That means increasing starvation, increasing famine, and increasing the number of financial weapons of mass destruction. And that's why everybody needs to expose this as well. I believe that Israel next is going to escalate with Lebanon. Now there's been that de-escalation. And that would involve US having to come through, because Hezbollah is a significantly larger force. And then we need to see whether they retaliate based upon the Iran retaliation. And I'll keep covering that in future episodes. I'll continue to watch oil and make sure I report back on that. There was a spike in the price. I'll continue to watch gold, because BRICS currency is buying all of those gold supplies, which is now at all-time highs. And I will continue to make sure that everyone understands Bitcoin. And the further it goes down in dollar terms, the more Bitcoin you can buy, which is proof of work, peaceful proof of work, buying it with your proof of weapons network. The further the price goes down, the more Bitcoin you get to buy. Value your wealth in Bitcoin, and make sure you got your free membership to the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. You can catch up with some of the videos, get a copy of a free digital copy of my book, and I'll make sure you're on the mailing list when we do the big reveal on everything that I'm investing on, reveal how the last 4 years were and what I'm doing for the future 4 years to protect myself. Head over to simondixon.com. That is going to be everything for Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 53. Always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history, but unfortunately it's going to be tragic and bad for many. And it's going to be amazing for others that are actually part of these crimes, but we want to defund those crimes and use Bitcoin as a peaceful resistance as every individual country and company fights in a way of peace, love, and unity, which is the worst thing that you could do for those that are interfering in the world of peace. It's not you civilians, it's governments, and we must resist. We must have Telegram. We must have freedom of speech of X. We must boycott those that have become implants for the agenda. And we must all make sure our countries, companies, and us as an individual engage in that peaceful resistance. I'll see you next week. Peace.